He left me when I was nothing, but came crawling back when my name meant everything. He told me I wasn't enough, not elegant enough, not ambitious enough, not woman enough to stand beside him as he built a future he never planned to share with me, and I believed him. Because when you've loved someone since the age of 17, when you've held their hand through council flat evictions and midnight job applications, when you've sold your mom's gold earrings to help them buy a used car for their first corporate job interview, you don't imagine they'll ever look you in the eye one Tuesday afternoon and say, I need someone who fits into the life I'm going to have, while folding their designer jacket and stepping into a Mercedes you didn't know they had. But Nathan did exactly that. And the worst part wasn't that he left, it was how he did it. Like I was some poor draft he needed to erase before. Publishing his real life, walking away in his polished brogues while I stood on the pavement in my Greg's uniform, holding a half-eaten cheese roll and a crushed heart, and when I called my best friend Madiha that night, crying on the bathroom floor, she said, one day he'll regret it, babes. Wait and see. And I laughed through my snot and said, people like me don't get one day, we just get left. That life, as it turns out, isn't loyal to status, it's loyal to story, and mine was only beginning. The next 2 years were hell, pure and raw, full of misrents, dodgy landlords, 0-hour contracts, and panic attacks in Tesco's frozen aisle. And just when I thought I'd finally drown beneath it all, a letter arrived, thick envelope, expensive gold stamped seal, and inside it, words that felt like fiction. My mother, who had abandoned me as a baby and moved to Spain to marry some marble tycoon, had died and left me everything. The house in Chelsea, the villa in Marbella, the vintage car collection, the trust fund, the art, the shares in a bloody French vineyard. Everything. And I remember reading it aloud in my tiny bedsit next to the moldy radiator and laughing like a mad woman. Not because I was happy, but because it felt like the universe had mixed up its files and handed me someone else's destiny. But it was real, and after the shock wore off, I transformed. Not in the way money makes you cruel, but in the way pain makes you elegant. I got a stylist, a therapist, a full dental reconstruction, and silence, glorious silence, because I didn't post a single thing online. I wanted no one to know, especially him, and for 3 years I vanished from the world that had mocked me, re-emerging only when I was steel beneath silk. I bought the cafe where I once worked and turned it into a boutique, dessert bar with 12 pounds tiramisu and gold leaf cappuccinos. I funded scholarships for South Asian girls in tech. I hosted art shows where the painters were homeless once like me, and all of it was mine, built not from bitterness, but from something far deadlier, indifference, until one day, the past knocked at my gate in the form of a familiar figure holding a cheap bouquet outside my Chelsea townhouse. And I watched him on the intercom for 5 minutes before stepping outside in satin and diamonds, face unreadable, heels sharp enough to slice memory, and said, yes? And Nathan, dear sweet social climbing Nathan, blinked like he'd seen a ghost, stammering something about coincidence and thinking of me lately, and how you're looking incredible. And I just tilted my head like a painting. He couldn't afford and said, you look tired, and let the silence fill the space between his scripted regret and my unscripted power. He tried again the next day and the next, sending flowers I never opened, texts I never read, and one night, even a voice note saying, I know I made a mistake. I thought she was everything, but she was just expensive emptiness, and I didn't reply because I was busy flying out to Marbella to sign off on a charity hospital built in my mother's name, the mother who once left me behind like a forgotten umbrella. Now, ironically, the reason I was being worshipped by the same world that once spat at my poverty. Weeks passed, then months, and Nathan grew bolder, showing up at my events, chatting up my staff, even crying at my past desk, saying he missed the realness we once had. And finally, out of sheer curiosity or cruelty or maybe the poetic itch of closure, I invited him to dinner, private table, high-rise London, 7 courses of Michelin arrogance, and he arrived in a suit I once ironed for him. Hair perfectly imperfect, eyes rehearsing redemption. And for an hour, he spilled his remorse like fine wine, telling me how the rich girl dumped him for a crypto DJ, how he'd lost his job, how no one really saw him like I did. And when he was done, I folded my napkin, looked him square in the eyes and said, "I didn't level up to be your soft landing." And when he flinched, I added, "You taught me how cruel love can be." I just made sure I never needed it again, then walked out before dessert, heels clicking like thunder, leaving him with the bill and a silence thick enough to drown in. 2 days later, a journalist reached out asking for a comment, apparently. Nathan had sold our love story to a tabloid, trying to spin it as a lost soul finds redemption feature, and I sent them a quote that read, "If heartbreak was his lesson, I hope he passed with distinction." And from that day on, I never saw him again, not because I was hiding, but because he finally realized some women don't wait for closure. They build empires in its place, and if by some twist of fate he ever finds himself walking past one of my properties, staring up at the gold lettering of my name, I hope he remembers the girl in the Greg's uniform he left in the rain, because she doesn't just own buildings now, she owns her story, and it no longer includes him.